I've actually entitled this morning's message, The Burial Place of Insignificance. And as we touch on this story a little bit more, one of the things that I enjoy doing in my travels is I love to go to graveyards, take time, an hour or two, just to walk through the graveyards and read some of the tombstones. I think it's interesting, some of the tombstones from years ago said so much about a person's life. Nowadays, because it costs so much, I'm sure is the main reason, all we put is their birth date, death date, and their name on many of the tombstones. You don't see many sayings now. So I love to go to some of these old cemeteries. And I've been all over America and done this and went in to look at some of these old cemeteries and see some of the epitaphs that's written on some of these markers. There's one in Texas that sticks out. I found a couple of cool ones. One particular place down in South Texas, I found this graveyard on the side of the highway, and I pulled over and was reading this one epitaph where this dude was buried standing up holding his rifle. I thought, oh, what a cool way to go, man. That would be all right, you know. Don't do that to me. I don't care what you do to me. It don't matter, but I ain't going to be here. But I thought that was kind of neat. But there was one in particular that kind of stuck out. The lady's name was Grace Llewellyn Smith. I wrote this down because I didn't want to get it wrong, and I actually gave it to Brother Chris to stick up there so you can read it too as I read it. It's interesting, Miss Grace Llewellyn Smith, no date of her birth was listed, no date of her death, just the names of her two husbands in this sad epitaph. Sleeps but rests not, loved but was loved not, tried to please but pleased not, died as she lived alone. As I read that epitaph, I had to wonder about Grace Llewellyn Smith. Who was she? Was she young? Was she old? It didn't tell what year she was born, nor what year she died. It didn't tell anything about her other than the fact she had two husbands, and that's her testimony. I wondered if she's the one that wrote these words or if someone wrote them about her and she just simply lived them. I wonder if she was plain or beautiful, young or old. I wonder, Miss Smith, what broke your heart? Sleeps but rests not, loved but was loved not, tried to please but was pleased not, died as she lived, alone. Aren't there a lot of Grace Llewellyn Smiths in the world today? People that for whatever reason just don't get what they're searching for in life. The lady we're going to read about in this story, the Samaritan woman, if there is a Grace Llewellyn Smith in the New Testament, I think she's got to be one of them. As we find out a little bit later, she'd been married 5 times, and the guy she was with now is not even her husband, but her shack-up boyfriend. Miss Smith, what was your life like? Why was you so hurt? Did you ever find the joy that God had in store for you? How many of us are living the life that she lived? Alone, searching, seeking, never seeming to find what makes a difference in our lives. Now, with that in mind, I want you to think back to the story that we just read. Jesus had been traveling with his disciples. He was wearied and tired. He had got to the point when he came over in Samaria. I like what verse 4 says, that he must needs go through Samaria. In other words, he had to go there because God had a job for him there. It's interesting to note when he gets down to verse 6, it says Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well. Can you picture Jesus? He's been walking all day. He's tired and he's wearied. And he comes by and he just sits down on the well. His disciples run on to town, start gathering food, buying supplies, getting the beef jerky and whatever they're doing. And there sat Jesus, tired. His feet were hurting him. He was dirty and dusty from walking all day. All of his friends had run around to take care of the busy stuff, and Jesus is there by himself. One of those really cool times that we find Jesus all alone. And all of a sudden, he looks up about noontime, about the 6th hour, which is noontime to us. There's a lady that approaches him with a water jug. She came to draw water out of the well. I want to ask the first question, why is this lady coming at noontime? Why didn't she come early in the morning with the other ladies when it was cool? Maybe she did. Maybe she just needed an extra drink. I don't know. Maybe she ran out of water, but more than likely, I would imagine she probably figured it's a lot easier to come in the heat of the day than it is to come and hear the cutting words of the other women. There's that woman. There's that old whore. She's sleep with anything in town. Been married 5 times, shacking up with somebody now, ain't even her husband. A man who doesn't love her enough to give her his name, he just gives her a place to sleep at night. She probably had heard all those other women running their mouth through the years, and she just didn't want to have to put up with it. So maybe she comes during the time of day that nobody else would come. But when she gets to the well, there's a guy sitting there. He looks like any other guy. He's just another Jew. She expects, as most Jews, because you got to understand, the Jews looked down on the Samaritans because the Samaritans were half-breeds. They were mixed with the Babylonians. When the Babylonians invaded Israel hundreds of years earlier, they began to mix races with the Samaritans, so the Jews were holier than thou. They said, well, we ain't going to put up with a bunch of half-breeds. We ain't having nothing to do with them. It's interesting to note that Jesus said, I must go through there. I need to go there because there's a lady who has been left out. There's a woman who has been neglected. There's a person who has been talked about and put down enough. And can I ask you this morning, have you ever been talked about or put down? If you have been, then this morning I want to tell you about that one touch that these girls sang about just a little while ago, that Jesus made a difference in this woman's life. As Jesus sits on that well, and he's tired and wearied, as verse 6 says, and he sat on that well till noontime. The verse 7, there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. She expected Jesus to not say a word to her, but instead he says this in verse 7, give me to drink. He was all by himself. Can I tell you this much? Back in the day, that was considered disgraceful to talk to a single woman out in public. Jesus could have been looked down upon by his disciples and some of his friends in a very, very bad manner. Matter of fact, that might be why God had to send all the rest of the boys into town, because they would have found fault and ruined the opportunity for this woman to get saved. Ain't it a sad case that sometimes God has to move the church people out of the way before God can get in the way? Why? As good as Peter, James, and John were, they were filled with prejudice. And Jesus knew their hearts. Now, don't get me wrong, Jesus didn't give up on them boys, because he said, as he does with me a lot of times, he just shakes his head and goes, man, Chris, I got a lot of work for you, boy. I got to do a lot of work on you. I'm sure he thought about that, about his disciples too. But as Jesus sits there on this well, this Samaritan woman comes by, a 5-time divorcee, shacking up now. And she meets this man named Jesus. I want to share with you about 3 thoughts that I see about this woman and about her insignificance that we can learn from her life today. I can't cover all this story. It would take a whole day of preaching, I'm sure. So I want to share with you just a few thoughts as God has laid them on my heart to share with you this morning. First of all, this lady was needy. I see her as being in need of something. Look at verse 10. Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. Jesus sees this woman not as a failure, but he sees her as a woman in need. She was in need of God's love. She was in need of God's acceptance. She was in need of God's salvation. Can I ask you this morning, what is your need? And we all got them.